Koichi, who was stressed about preparing for his university entrance exams, couldn't study because someone was constantly making noise. He kept hearing footsteps in the attic, which prevented him from concentrating. He knew the troublemaker was his younger brother, Soichi, so he complained to their father. However, Soichi was watching TV with their father, and their sister confirmed that Soichi hadn't left his room. After returning to his study, Koichi heard Soichi's voice again. He rushed out to punish his brother, but Soichi claimed he urgently needed to use the bathroom. Thinking Soichi was lying, Koichi didn't let him go, resulting in Soichi wetting his pants. When Koichi complained to their father, Soichi insisted he wasn't the cause of the noise. Soichi even suggested that Koichi might be haunted, which was why he kept hearing strange sounds. Naturally, Koichi didn't believe him, but Soichi warned that those who didn't believe in the supernatural could be punished. Back in his room, Koichi heard noises coming from behind him. He was startled to see some objects floating in the air before falling to the ground. Fearful that he might indeed be haunted, as Soichi suggested, Koichi approached to investigate and found many strings tied to the objects. Following the strings, he discovered Soichi hiding in the closet. It turned out that Soichi was behind everything. Unable to tolerate it any longer, Koichi told his father he wanted to move out. To soothe Koichi's anger, his father promised to hire a carpenter to build a soundproof room for him. Soichi overheard this conversation. The next day, the carpenter arrived, looking quite strange. He promised to use all his skills to create the best soundproof room for Koichi. The carpenter wanted to add 4 additional walls inside for soundproofing because the number 4 symbolizes death. He seemed more like a coffin maker than a carpenter. When Soichi started hammering nails into the wall, the carpenter didn't scold him but instead praised his skill in hammering nails. So, did the soundproof room get built according to Koichi's wishes? A few days later, the carpenter finished renovating Koichi's room. When Koichi opened the door, he was surprised to find 3 more doors inside. As the carpenter had mentioned, there were a total of 4 walls. The interior space had shrunk, leaving just enough room for one person to sit. Koichi needed a quiet place to study for his exams, and this seemed sufficient. However, he soon heard the sound of cicadas. It was winter, so there shouldn't be any cicadas. Koichi suspected his brother was behind this. Judging by the thickness of the walls, he deduced that Soichi might be in the space between the walls, creating the noise. He found an entrance in the attic and immediately crawled in. Thus, Soichi's mischief was exposed. Seeing his brother appear, Soichi turned and fled. Koichi quickly followed and discovered numerous secret doors all over the attic. Koichi was then attacked by many nails that Soichi had hammered in. After falling from the attic, Koichi realized that chasing after his brother like this wouldn't solve anything. He decided to return to his study room, though the cicada noises created by Soichi continued to bother him. Unexpectedly, the oxygen level in the space between the walls started to decrease. This made it increasingly difficult for Soichi to breathe, causing him to fall down the stairs. That was the end for the troublemaker who didn't know when to stop. The man looked extremely haggard, having not slept for 3 days and nights. His girlfriend, sitting across from him, thought Yuji was pulling all-nighters to work on his manuscript again. Yuji shook his head, took a deep drag from his cigarette, and said it wasn't the manuscript, but rather a problem with his mind. Only his girlfriend would listen to his ramblings about these issues, so he hoped she could help him. Yuji explained that he had a living duplicate in his own house, trying to break into the real world. If he fell asleep, the duplicate would wake up, and they would exist simultaneously. It would then pull him into a dream and trap him there. This had happened 3 days ago, and he hadn't dared to sleep since, leading to his current dazed state. Mari thought he was delusional. Yuji immediately denied this, begging Mari to believe that it wasn't a lie or his imagination. Mari suggested that he should see a doctor to check his mental state. Disappointed by her response, Yuji walked out of the cafe. Worried about her boyfriend, Mari quickly followed him. She thought it was just a psychological issue, so she asked how she could help. Yuji replied that just being by his side was enough. She had to ensure he didn't fall asleep. With no other choice, Mari agreed. After packing, she went to her boyfriend's apartment. Yuji was listening to music to stimulate himself. Mari asked about his clone, and Yuji confirmed the clone was in a sleep state. After persistently staying awake for several days, he was losing his grip on reality. At some point, he threw Mari a roll of tape and instructed her to tie his hands and feet. In case his clone appeared and his limbs were uncontrollable, it would be safer. Then he fell asleep. Mari initially didn't believe Yuji's words. Seeing him tied up, she couldn't bear it and cut the tape off his hands, covering him with a blanket. She then went to read a book in the room but accidentally fell asleep. Later that night, a strange sound woke her up suddenly. When she looked at her boyfriend sleeping, a hand unexpectedly emerged from his mouth and grabbed Mari's ankle. Terrified, she shouted Yuji's name. He woke up to find his clone appearing, and he grabbed the arm extending from his mouth and pushed it back inside. Then he struggled to pull the arm out from his own forearm. Mari rushed to help fix her boyfriend's hand. After restoring it to normal, Yuji asked if she had removed the tape. Terrified yet having witnessed the strange event firsthand, Mari, though skeptical of her boyfriend's words, admitted what had just happened was bizarre. Yuji explained he hadn't initially known about the clone's existence. If he slept, his body would manifest the strange phenomenon they had just witnessed, a different body emerging from within him whenever he drifted into dreams. Mari argued that the human body isn't hollow. If something emerged, his internal organs would be exposed. Unexpectedly, Yuji believed his body had been hollow since birth, devoid of internal organs. He had dreamt vividly about things more real than reality itself. It was in those dreams that he had mocked himself, leading him to discover his clone. Mari reasoned that dreams allowed one to do anything, so why would the clone want to come into the real world? Yuji fell silent, admitting that what the clone wanted was Mari. It saw Yuji as its rival and sought to win her over. He urged Mari to leave, unable to resist sleep much longer. To prevent her from getting hurt, he insisted on pushing her away. Mari refused to give up and bravely tied their hands together. Because their arms were entwined, Mari believed that the other wouldn't be able to escape. However, in the next moment, tragedy struck. Her arm was sucked into Yuji's body. It enveloped her as she screamed, ultimately swallowing her whole. A few days later, the police arrived to investigate Mari's disappearance. Upon seeing her luggage, they immediately questioned Yuji about what had happened. He explained that she was no longer in this world and had entered his dreams. In the end, Yuji lost to his own clone and couldn't protect the person he loved. Have you ever thought about the existence of another world? Ashikiri is a quiet and somewhat gloomy junior high school student who lives alone in a mysterious mansion. One day, while reading in the library, he overhears a few people nearby discussing a world different from Earth. Kamiyama mentions that lately Ashikiri has often sensed something beside him that doesn't belong to this world. When Watanabe asks if it's a ghost, Ashikiri says he doesn't think so. It seems to be a creature from another dimension. This is the first time he has felt this way, unsure of what has been happening. Watanabe mentions having read books about different dimensions, including one world referred to as the Bermuda Triangle. There's a book about it in this library, so everyone goes to find it and sees Ashikiri reading the exact book they're looking for. Seeing their interest, Ashikiri hands the book to them and prepares to leave. Kamiyama realizes he has been rude by disturbing Ashikiri and invites him to join them in studying the Bermuda Triangle. Inside the book, the author introduces readers to the existence of multiple different dimensions. In reality, the three of them are not classmates. Due to their shared interest in researching unsolved mysteries, they often come to the library to discuss together. Afterward, at the restaurant, Ashikiri mentions that he often hears strange footsteps in his house despite living alone. This piques their continuous interest. It's a rare opportunity to experience something unseen, so all three agree to visit Ashikiri's house to investigate. After school, they arrive at Ashikiri's house. Seeing the large mansion-like structure in front of them, they can't help but feel skeptical. Ashikiri leads them in through the back door and brings out a teapot. At this moment, Kamiyama asks Ashikiri if he really lives alone in this big house. Ashikiri confirms it. Hearing his answer, Kamiyama becomes puzzled. The atmosphere is quite peculiar. Ashikiri explains that the sound of footsteps usually appears at night but occasionally during the day as well. After Ashikiri takes them on a tour around the house, Kamiyama mentions that he can sense the presence of a different dimension within this house. This is the first time he has felt such a strong sensation like this. The footsteps could be an intruder from another world. The entrance must be somewhere within this mansion. As everyone was about to say goodbye and leave for home, suddenly the large clock in the room chimed loudly. Startled by the unfamiliar footsteps, they rushed out of the room to the hallway downstairs. Hearing voices outside, Watanabe told everyone to stop. They looked out the window in astonishment. Outside, a young man was digging a large hole in the yard with a shovel. Beside him lay a person tied up and motionless. Upon closer inspection, they realized the person digging the hole was actually Ashikiri. Witnessing this scene, they couldn't help but feel terrified. How could there be another Ashikiri in this world? Kamiyama speculated it was an Ashikiri from a different dimension, a copy of ourselves existing in that world. Meanwhile, the Ashikiri below had finished digging the hole. He brought the person from underground to the edge of the hole and pushed them down into it. It was at this moment everyone understood, in the other dimension, Ashikiri's copy had committed murder. To avoid punishment, he fled to this world to hide the body. Upon realizing the truth, the Ashikiri upstairs couldn't help but exclaim angrily at the other, telling him to stop. He proclaimed this was his house and questioned why the other dared to commit such acts here. When the Ashikiri downstairs heard the voices, he couldn't help but startle. He turned to look back at the Ashikiri above with a cold and terrifying expression, which then twisted into a horrifying smile. Afterward, he vanished into thin air. This left everyone confused and unsettled. Kamiyama speculated that he must be very adept at traveling between dimensions, hence able to disappear at will. He comforted the Ashikiri upstairs, reassuring him that the copy committed the murder, not him, they were completely separate entities. Kamiyama also thanked Ashikiri for bringing them here to witness this mysterious phenomenon. At that moment, Koizumi turned the body in the hole over, only to discover that the dead body was actually a copy of Kamiyama. Seeing this unbelievable sight, Ashikiri couldn't help but feel distressed. Kamiyama reassured Ashikiri that everything was all right. They then found fresh digging marks nearby, suspecting there might be another victim buried there. They dug up 2 more graves and were utterly shocked to find 2 more bodies, dressed identically to copies of Watanabe and Koizumi. Judging by the state of decay, these bodies seemed to have been dead for several years. Ashikiri hurriedly explained that he didn't kill anyone. Koizumi believed him, understanding that the copies from another world had committed the murders. They all agreed to bury the bodies again. In this manner, all 3 bodies were laid to rest within the gloomy mansion. In the days that followed, Ashikiri continued to hear footsteps every night. Until one day, Ashikiri from the other world came and killed the Ashikiri in this world. In this way, all 4 individuals who were involved in investigating the Bermuda Triangle phenomenon met their ends in the garden of the mysterious mansion. Chimi had been with her boyfriend for nearly 10 years. She took great care of him, fulfilling his every preference from how she dressed to the fragrance she wore. However, this attentiveness left Hiratsuka feeling disenchanted. He expressed that she was better suited to more serious men and asked her to stop contacting him without officially ending their relationship. Chimi didn't cling on, bidding him a final farewell. Returning home, she heard her younger sister mention a mouse in the attic. Despite setting traps, they proved ineffective against these cunning creatures that fled at the scent of danger. Alone, Chimi gazed at a photo of herself and her boyfriend. She lit a cigarette, a habit he favored, and smoked it while feeling choked with emotion. Looking at a picture from their first beach date, where her hair was short and breezy, she realized she had kept it long because he preferred it that way. That day marked a significant milestone in their relationship, her silky long hair now just a memory of happier times. Overwhelmed, she collapsed on her bed, tears streaming down her face, and eventually drifted into sleep. The next day, Chimi woke up to find her hair entangled in a dead mouse. She was horrified and hesitated to wash her hair because it was the long hair her boyfriend loved. It was then that she realized they had already broken up. So Chimi decided to cut her hair to bid farewell to her past. She asked her younger sister to bring scissors to help her. Shortly after, her sister heard a scream from Chimi's room. She rushed upstairs to check and was horrified by what she saw inside. Their mother came to see and discovered Chimi's body covered in blood. Strangely, her head was missing, blood gushing endlessly from her neck. On the wall, there was a pattern drawn with Chimi's own blood. A week later, Hiratsuka had a new girlfriend. His phone rang, waking him up. No one spoke on the other end of the line. Then he heard the sound of teeth gnashing. Thinking it was a harmless prank, he hung up. But upon reflection, he realized the gnashing sound was eerily similar to Chimi's. As he shuddered, the phone rang again. Chimi had died a week ago, and her family mourned deeply as they looked at her photograph. Recently, Chimi hadn't heard the sound of mice. She thought her younger sister had caught one in a trap and planned to dispose of it upstairs. Their father had told her to let him handle it. After waiting a long time without seeing her father come down, Chimi climbed up to check on the situation. She found her father holding a flashlight, his eyes wide open in shock. It seemed he had seen something terrifying. When Chimi went to investigate, she discovered her father had suffered a heart attack and died. Following her father's gaze, she saw her older sister's head hanging there. She tried to untie the rope to bring her sister's head down, but found her sister's hair incredibly sharp, causing her hand to be injured. As she was about to go downstairs for scissors, the hair pierced her and opened her eyes and mouth. It then controlled Chimi's head and ran out of the house. When her younger sister saw it, she couldn't stop trembling. Afterwards, her sister's head appeared at Hiratsuka's house, his body wrapped tightly in Chimi's hair hanging in midair. The more it wrapped, the tighter it became until his entire body exploded. By Chimi's wish, they would be together forever, unable to be separated. After a year of working abroad, Akasaka returned to Japan. He wondered how his house had changed after a year. While Akasaka was away, he had rented out his house to his younger brother's homeroom teacher. Rewinding to a year before, when Seiji heard that his older brother was going to work abroad, he called to ask him to rent the house to the homeroom teacher. Although Akasaka refused, Seiji was determined to introduce the teacher to him. Subsequently, the teacher appeared in front of Akasaka's house with his family. He observed the house and couldn't stop praising it. Akasaka, not wanting others to stay in his house, still refused. He said that he was only about to go abroad and still needed to stay for a while longer, then requested that they find another place to rent. The teacher said that he had looked in many places but still couldn't find one. Now, his family had nowhere to stay, and if Akasaka didn't rent to them, his whole family would become homeless. Seiji also mentioned that when Akasaka went abroad, he would be the one to look after the house, so Akasaka didn't need to worry too much. At that moment, the child in the teacher's wife's arms suddenly cried. Seiji wanted to see what was wrong, but the teacher's wife took the child elsewhere, as if she didn't want him to see her child. Feeling sorry for the teacher, Akasaka decided to rent his house to him. Currently, Akasaka has returned. He entered the living room and turned on the light, but it didn't illuminate, giving him a bad feeling. As he feared, the kitchen was filled with messy dishes and surrounded by countless trash bags. The food in the refrigerator had spoiled and emitted a terrible odor. Everything was covered in mold. Feeling utterly disgusted, Akasaka went to the bathroom to vomit. He saw that the bathtub beside him was covered with something, so he opened it to check. To his surprise, it was filled with black mud. Suddenly, Seiji's voice echoed. Akasaka went outside wanting to clarify everything. Seiji said that he didn't know his brother would return to Japan earlier than expected, so he hadn't had time to clean up. This immediately angered Akasaka. Initially, he hadn't wanted to rent the house to that family. He never imagined they would be worse than he thought. His house had now turned into a pigsty. Mold and mud were everywhere. Seiji continued to defend the family, saying it was all his fault. He then left without providing any reasonable explanation. Akasaka had no choice but to start cleaning the house so he could rest. The next day, he woke up to find the wall in his room looking very strange. Its surface was bulging out with a layer of some substance. He hadn't noticed it the previous night because the house was too dark. The second floor was even worse, the wall there was severely deformed. If this continued, his house would become uninhabitable. Akasaka called his younger brother to come and look, asking him what the homeroom teacher had done to the house and where they were now. Unexpectedly, Seiji said he didn't know, the family had moved out without informing him. When Akasaka checked the house that had burned down years ago, he saw it hadn't been rebuilt, so he had no idea where that family had gone. The neighbors also mentioned they hadn't seen the family for a while. With continuous rain, the mold in Akasaka's house grew thicker. He went to Seiji again, saying that his house might no longer be livable. The bathroom was unusable, and the second floor was completely rotten. Upon hearing this, Seiji's face suddenly changed. He trembled, saying that Akasaka couldn't stay there any longer and had to leave immediately. Realizing his brother was hiding something, Akasaka grabbed Seiji by the collar. The mold underfoot began to splatter onto Seiji, causing him to back away in fear. Finally, Seiji revealed the truth: the condition of Akasaka's house was similar to that of the homeroom teacher's child. Seiji had visited this family before and saw that the child crawled around the house with severely sagging skin. The teacher's daughter appeared with the same condition. It seemed to be a parasitic disease. If infected, it was very dangerous. That's why Seiji urged his brother to move out as soon as possible. Akasaka asked if he could stay at Seiji's place for a while, to which Seiji hastily agreed before leaving. Seiji's attitude was due to his fear of infection. The house continued to change, with many snake-like objects appearing everywhere. Stepping on them released a black liquid. When Akasaka went to the second floor, he saw the door was completely rotten. He grasped the doorknob and opened it, causing everything to collapse. The room was filled with objects resembling large snakes. Inside were several corpses, which Akasaka recognized as the homeroom teacher's family. It turned out they had never moved out but had been killed by the strange mold. Seeing this, Akasaka's face began to itch. It seemed he couldn't escape the infection either. When Goro was 4 years old, he was standing in his father's study, looking at the moonlight, when suddenly a monster appeared before him. As Goro grew up, he married a diligent wife. One day, unable to find his favorite book, he called his wife over. Kuko said she had taken it. This made him very angry, and he reminded her that in the future, she must get his permission before taking any of his books. Goro also told Kuko to return his favorite book to its place as soon as possible. That night, Goro wrote in his diary. His habit of diary writing had formed after his mother abandoned him. That night, Goro was awakened by a nightmare. He dreamt that his favorite book collection was disappearing one by one. Worried, Goro went to the study to check. Sure enough, one book was missing. It was his mother's favorite book. Another book was also missing, the scariest book in the world, which was his father's favorite. This caused Goro to cry out in pain. The next day, Goro was awakened by the doorbell. He opened the door and saw a girl dressed in white standing outside. Hearing his wife's call, Goro turned back and said that he had found his mother's favorite book. When Kuko asked where it was, he explained that someone had rung the doorbell, and when he answered, he saw a very beautiful girl. She reminded him of his mother. He added that the girl was like a winter breeze and had memorized his mother's favorite book. Kuko thought he was dreaming again. Goro denied it, insisting that the beautiful girl was standing right in front of his wife. But Kuko saw only a single red maple leaf, with no girl in sight. Suddenly, Goro wrapped himself in a blanket and sat beside the bookshelf. He said that his father's favorite book, the scariest book in the world, had returned. Goro believed he had thrown it away, but it reappeared last night through the window, and a monster outside had recited the curse inside the book to him, terrifying him. Kuko wanted to find a psychologist for her husband, but Goro insisted that he didn't need one. As night fell, the monster from hell that Goro feared reappeared. He began reading the horror novel aloud. Suddenly, scars started to appear on his body, increasing in number. After enduring this torment, Goro sat in his study and declared that he had conquered hell. A few days later, his mother's favorite book disappeared again. To avoid being separated from his beloved book collection, he decided to memorize all their contents. After reading day and night for a while, Goro had memorized everything. While he was resting from his exhaustive efforts, the lamp beside him suddenly fell, setting fire to all the books in the room. Goro's house, situated on a hill with many red maple trees, also caught fire. Subsequently, Goro was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. He aged there, and one day, he jumped out of a window and died. There were 3 books on his bed, his mother's favorite book, the terrifying book about hell, and next to them, a maple leaf. The scene suddenly shifted to Goro at age 4, holding hands with a woman dressed in white, looking happy. The story might be unclear to some, but it is, in fact, a tragedy about Goro's life. His father had violent tendencies, and his mother couldn't endure it any longer, so she left home. Growing up, Goro loved reading and compared his mother to the protagonist in a romantic novel, while he compared his father to hell itself. To Goro, that was the scariest book in the world. The scars on his body were the marks of his father's violence. Throughout his life, Goro was always accompanied by a gentle wife named Kuko. However, she was a figment of his imagination. Desperate for happiness, he created this image of a loving wife. After struggling with mental illness for many years, he grew old and eventually took his own life by jumping from a window. The image of him holding hands with a beautiful woman who resembled his mother symbolized his deepest longing throughout his life.